All right, welcome back everyone to Question Field, the place where you ask the questions and we field them. The we being myself, Brian, and I'm joined once again, as always, by
me, Campbell.
a lot of pep.
Oh yeah, I'm so excited for today.
yeah, we have a good one. Campbell, we were supposed to record the other day, but you sent me a desperate text saying you must take to the sea.
That's right. Yeah, the ocean called me, and I had to answer. So there's a rowing race happening at the moment in Cambridge, and I used to be involved in the boat club at my college, and some stuff went down in the first couple of days of this 4-day kind of series of races. And that meant that I had to step into what's called cox, the rowing boat, which is sort of the person at the back of the boat that shouts a lot and steers the boat. And
do you use a drum?
I really wish I had a drum. I've been petitioning the boat club to invest in a drum, but no. Instead, I just use my voice, and so as you can maybe tell, my vocal cords are a little strained at the moment.
I'll be honest, Campbell, as like a soft-spoken podcaster, I would not. You would not be the first person I would imagine to be shouting at the end. Like, how did that happen? That you were the one.
It's a different side of me. Maybe you haven't seen it, Brian. Yeah, it's something else comes out deep within, and it takes over. But it's all encouraging shouting. It's not angry shouting.
Well, there you go. There you go. All right. Well, man, what a good bit of banter to get this going.
Indeed. It's our obligatory banter. Now that's been
yes.
Enough time for that.
Yeah.
What is the question we're dealing with today, Brian?
So our question comes from, so this is going to date the podcast, but we're recording this the day before Father's Day, and the question comes from my father. So happy Father's Day, Dad.
Yeah, very exciting.
Yeah.
Very appropriate.
Yeah, I asked him for a question, many, many months ago when we started this, and I've been thinking about this question since he first asked it, and I've done a lot of research, and I am more confused than ever. It is such a complicated question, and here's what it is, but without further ado, all right? He starts off quoting Pink Floyd, saying, "Overhead, the albatross hangs motionless upon the air," which I believe is from the song Echoes. Are you a Pink Floyd person?
I quite like Pink Floyd. Yeah, absolutely. However, I don't think I know the song Echoes. So maybe I'm a fake fan.
There you go. All right, so here's the actual question from my dad. He says this: can a bird remain aloft and quote-unquote glide merely by facing into the wind, that is, without flapping its wings, or does it necessarily need to find some air movement with a definite upward component, such as a thermal? Mm-hmm. So I suppose what he's saying is it possible for a bird just to stay completely stationary and continue to, fly and glide just with an oncoming wind? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And boy, oh boy, fluid dynamics is a tough one.
Yeah.
Campbell, do you have a particular area you want to start with this one?
I feel like I actually want to jump in with an immediate answer to this question before we get into the reason, because I think we usually sort of faff around introducing things for ages.
That's around a bit, yeah.
But I think that it is unambiguous that a bird cannot hover in midair without any upward component for the to the motion of the air. But I don't know. What do you think? Do you agree with that, or do you unambiguously think the other way around?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the. I agree. That's where I was landing as well, and not gliding, right? No.
But I will say that when I first heard this question, I intuitively felt that, yeah, sure, why not? If the wind is strong enough, then the force of the upwards force due to lift is going to be strong enough. So why can't the bird hover? But we'll get into this. But I think in fact it is the other way around. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, part of my intuition on this, just thinking about this, is that it's not what it's not what happens. It's not what we see. Like, I feel like if it was possible and easy and that was the most efficient way to do things, that's what we would see birds doing, and it's not. So what is it that they're doing and why? And that's kind of where I was looking into how this all works.
And it's a subject kind of close to my hobbies at the moment, because
you who do not like the ground.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I'm getting into gliding, so in planes without engines, and they do as birds do when they soar on thermals and hover or glide without flapping. Yeah, we're flapless birds, basically.
All of us, just flapless birds.
Yeah, so where do you want to kind of start in and actually sort of trying to explain and dive into this topic?
I have heard of in the past, you hear about these birds that can fly for like 2 weeks straight.
Sure, without
ever landing. Yeah, albatrosses. You have these condors that will fly across the Pacific, apparently, and there's nowhere to land, so they don't. They just keep going.
That's incredible.
Yeah, I learned, and something else when I was thinking about this problem is like, if we are picturing a bird that's not moving, is that like indistinguishable from, say, like a plane or a glider? And it turns out, I think I read that albatrosses do actually have a mechanism where their bones will lock, and so they will be pretty rigid, because I figured this is one of those cases where there's always going to be these small fluctuations, and when you're dealing with something like wind and all these particles, and these tiny differences are going to add up and shift things around, so there's never going to be an ideal case, yada yada. But I was like, that's kind of interesting. Bird wings actually stay locked in.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I didn't actually know that.
Yeah.
And you can imagine that would be much more efficient as well. Like if you're relying on the structure of your skeleton, that's less work that your muscles have to do to hold your wings in place.
Right. Yeah. There's less strain there.
Yeah.
And something else I wanted to talk about too, just because my father mentioned it, was this idea of thermal.
Yeah. Well, okay. So a thermal is rising air due to the ground being heated by the sun, and thereby sort of like heating the air close to the ground. And because hot air rises, the air close to the ground rises up, and that rising air you can use to actually gain altitude if you're a glider or if you're a bird. And then eventually it sort of reaches this maximum height, and the moisture in the air condenses and it forms a cloud. And so you can sort of locate thermals by finding these nice fluffy cumulus clouds with a flat bottom. So that means if the bottom's flat, it means they're still forming and they're nice and fresh. So that's what glider pilots look for when they want to stay in the air for longer. And it's also what birds use when they, certain birds, like birds of prey, for example, they use to gain altitude more efficiently than flapping or with less energy expenditure. And they kind of, you sort of use one another to figure out where these things are. If you see a bird circling, you're like, oh, okay, maybe I fly over that way.
It seems that's one thing that you can kind of like surf these thermals. It seems like it's a combination of these different methods. There was something else I saw, the method of which was like, if you have a large cliff face and you have a lot of wind that's pushing into the cliff face, well, it has to go somewhere. It's not going to go into the cliff. So if that's going to be another type of, the air is literally just going to be pushed up. Yeah. Birds will take advantage of that too.
That's called
I would not recommend that.
Ridge soaring. Yeah.
Yeah. I probably imagine gliders don't like to rely on that too much.
Oh, I mean, no, it's actually quite a popular way of soaring. Yeah, it can be dangerous, but it's
can be
with risk comes reward.
Sure. I'm not a huge fan of flying. I don't know if you can gather. I don't.
Yeah. Well, maybe you just need more control. I'm still a fairly nervous flyer commercially, but if you have more control, then sometimes the nerves can dissipate.
Yeah, maybe that's what it is.
Yeah.
I don't like the surrender to some pilot.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's a couple of other ways that you can use the wind to gain altitude. So another one is if you have a mountain range or a ridge or something like that, but you're on what's called the leeward side, so you're on the sort of downwind side of that range, the wind hitting the mountain range can set up a standing wave on the downwind side of the hills. And so, you've got wind that's sort of oscillating up and down. And if you sort of, as you say, kind of surf that wave, you can use those waves to gain altitude. And in fact, that's the way that you can get the highest in gliding. So there's a competition. No, not a competition. Sorry, there's a world record attempt for the sort of highest altitude achieved by a engineless plane glider, and that is I think they hold the world record, and they've got to something like 70,000 feet through this really specific phenomenon that happens in the Andes in South America, where on the downwind side of the Andes or thereabouts, I'm not super confident with the details of how this works, but it's basically it's this form of wave lift that they're using to soar and gain altitude. And they were planning on trying to reach 100,000 feet, and I'm not sure if they've reached it yet, but I think they're still trying to do that. But it's fascinating stuff. I mean, it's very impressive, the heights that you can actually get to just from the wind.
Daredevils, I can't do it. So, how do things actually stay in the air? What causes lift? I think, Campbell, it might be worth mentioning a few caveats. Which the first one I want to mention is that this is one of those topics where, unfortunately, there's not a nice, simple, elegant explanation. It is pretty complicated. And our format as a podcast, I think, also might put a strike against us. Obviously, we're going to try and do our best.
Yeah.
So that's right off the top. The other thing that makes talking about lift and how airplanes fly is that there are a lot of explanations out there that I'll give credit for, like, good intuition, but there's usually some fatal flaw or something that's overlooked, and it's incomplete. And, I think we strive for something a little more here on Question Field.
Yeah, and they are constantly debated.
Yeah.
No one seems to agree on which is the correct explanation. And,
this is funny. This is something I came across, is like, even the man himself, Mr. Einstein, took a crack at this, and he would, and I do want to talk about it later, just briefly, but his conclusion at the end of it, when he reflected on his work in this area, he said, that was a youthful folly. And so
interesting. I wasn't aware that he had anything to do with this topic, but there you go.
Yeah.
You can't escape Einstein.
No, he's kind of like a night terror in that way. So, I mean, that's what I'm aiming for, at least here, is youthful folly at the very least. Hopefully a little more than that.
Sounds good to me.
Let's start with some of these explanations. So it's kind of like we did last time with bikes. Let's start with the simple force diagram. What are the forces acting on a plane, right? There's thrust pushing it forward. It's going to experience some drag from the air that wants to keep it from going that way. Gravity's pulling it down. And so then what keeps it in the air? What's the force acting up on it? It's this idea of lift.
Yeah.
And so that's where we are. And so when I was really diving into this, I saw that there were kind of two major competing ideas. There was like Team Bernoulli in this corner of the ring. And in this corner of the ring, we had Newtonian explanation. Yeah. Which one do you think we should tackle first?
Let's start with the Bernoulli explanation.
And this is the one that I think I heard way back in high school or something, and was watching videos. And so the idea is, you have your wing, and it's a curved wing, which is an airfoil, is the name of that. And the idea is that, you have let's say you have two air particles moving towards it. One is going to go over the top and the other goes across the bottom. And the one that goes over the top, it has a longer way to go, so it has to go faster to get to the end of the wing than the bottom one does, because the bottom one can move in a straighter path. And it's because this air particle on top is moving faster. That means, according to Bernoulli's principle, if you have your fluid moving faster, you're going to have less pressure. And with this less pressure on top and more pressure on the bottom, that's what's going to give you lift. Your wing is going to move up into the lower pressure area. It's being pushed up from the bottom. And the main problem with this that jumps out to me was like, why do the two particles have to meet up at the end at the same time? Like, there doesn't seem to be a reason why. And so, digging into this, I learned that, there is no reason why they have to. In fact, they don't.
So just to reiterate, so there are kind of two parts of this explanation, right? There is firstly, the explanation says, okay, air over the top of the wing is going to be having to travel faster than air over the bottom of the wing. Firstly, we need to explain that. And they say, or not they, one sort of hypothesis, which is discredited, as you say, is that, air that is close together, or air parcels that are close together at the front end of the wing, meet up at the trailing end of the wing, also close together. So they have a sort of equal transit time. And then the reason that equates to fastness of the air over the top of the wing is because of the shape of the wing. The curvature of the wing means that the air over the top is, if it has the equal transit time, it has a faster velocity. The second part of the explanation is that, as you're saying, there's this principle from Bernoulli, which is relating the velocity of a fluid to its pressure. And the faster you send, or the faster that the fluid goes, the lower pressure it has. Yeah. And so then that means that the air on the top of the wing has lower pressure. So it gets, a resulting force is upwards from the air.
Bernoulli's principle, this Bernoulli effect, is involved, but I think the key thing that's missing from this explanation is why is the air moving faster over the top? And that's what's missing there. There is going to be less pressure on top.
Yeah.
The air is going to be moving faster, but it's not so much to do with the shape in and of itself. I mean, you can design, aircraft with flat wings, right? And so that right there kind of puts a dent in that one.
Yeah, and another issue with this this explanation is this equal transit time idea. As you pointed out, that's not true. The sort of air particles that are close together at the front of the wing do not actually end up close together at the back of the wing. And in fact, what you tend to find apparently is that the air traveling over the top of the wing travels much faster than you would normally expect for this, if you assume equal transit times. And that makes sense because if you calculate the lift produced, assuming equal transit times, what you find is what you find is a force that is much less than is required to keep the thing in the air. So it's a very good thing that we don't have this equal transit time idea turning out to be true, because then nothing would fly.
Right. Yeah, it's a little bit like trying to apply working backwards from this idea of low pressure, the air must be moving faster, and then arriving at this idea that there's this equal transit time. Mm-hmm. And the other side of the ring is this Newtonian idea. And so the basic principle with this one is that, you have your wing angled down, or pointing downward, and you have, this massive air then mostly hitting the bottom of your wing. And, I read this theory as being described as like a skipping stone almost, where you just keep having air constantly hit into this wing and not so much on top. And, I guess the general idea of this theory is, if the wing is pushing the air down from it, well, then the air must be pushing up on the wing. and that's where you're gonna get your quote unquote lift from.
Yeah, it's an application of Newton's third law.
Yeah. And this one has some immediacy for me because it's summertime. I'm driving around now with my window down sometimes, and I'll put my hand out the window, and if you just curve your hand a little, like, you'll feel it, right? Your hand will move up and down.
Yeah, and probably you would feel, well, you can sort of feel it at slower speeds in a pool or something, right, where the fluid is water instead of air. Yeah, exactly.
And the big problem with this explanation is that it doesn't really explain the low pressure on top of the wing. It's like very focused just on the bottom of the wing.
Yeah, exactly. And also, just going in absolute reverse of of our initial criticism of the first explanation, you can have wings that work perfectly well without being deflected down at the trailing edge.
Right.
The only element of the wing that is producing the lift is its camber, which is to say its sort of asymmetry from the top surface to the bottom surface. So again, that lends itself to the pressure explanation, the Bernoulli explanation, more so than the Newtonian one.
So then what actually happens? So this is where I got in my understanding of this. What it really comes back to is getting to the bottom of how is the air moving faster over the top of the wing? Because there is some of both of these at play. Like there will eventually be lower pressure on top, higher pressure on bottom. There is some air hitting the bottom of the wing if it's curved that way. But it starts with the air that is going over the top, whether it's because you have your wing curved or you're just angling it. You have that bend where it needs to go over the top. The act of having to make that turn or curve that way means the air has to be accelerating, right? It's no longer going a straight line. It has to be accelerating. And so that's part of what's going to be making it speed up. The second part of that is after it kind of gets past the bend, it is going to start moving straight again, but just for a moment. But what that's going to do is that's going to create a slight vacuum in that space between where it is and, beneath it before you get to the top of the wing itself. And as you have mentioned before, Campbell, nature abhors a vacuum. And, so the air on the top, that has just gone around the bend is going to be pulled down and is kind of forced into that vacuum and not fill it completely, but there will be just enough left where at that point it will be pulled along the rest of the wing. Right. And then you have kind of a cascading effect from there where, the more air you have moving faster over the swing, the more air it's going to pull in. This is going to keep happening and happening and happening until other forces like drag start taking over. And, you just don't have as much air as you could possibly need or make use of or something like that.
Well, yeah. Eventually you get to speed of sound or something where
the
dynamics is very different.
So I kind of wrote this out in 4 points. So like the full idea of this is these 4 things in combination. Is you have this downward turning of the air after it crosses the bend. That's going to increase your airspeed, which is going to create a low pressure area. And because you have a low pressure area and a high pressure area, the result of those 2 things are going to aerodynamically force your wing up. So how did I do?
So yeah, the key thing is that, well, one of the key aspects of this is that yes, there is air that's going faster over the top of the wing. And again, this can happen even in uncambered aerofoils. So when there's a symmetry between the top surface and the bottom surface, but the aerofoil is tilted so that the leading edge is sort of tilted up and the trailing edge is tilted down. I mean, that's my understanding. It's you do have this faster airflow, and as you sort of identified, the key question is why. Where is this actually coming from? And yeah, it's the sort of reaction to the fact that you've got some curved surface sitting in this flowing air that is causing this effect. And but it's actually quite non-trivial to work out exactly where this effect comes from. And hand in hand with this is more of a Newtonian explanation again, not to discard the the Newtonian explanation that we had before. This sort of has equal merit, because what you see is that, as was kind of hinted by what you were saying there, when you look at the air that's coming off the trailing edge of the wing and compare it to the air that's coming onto the leading edge of the wing, what you find is that the air coming onto the leading edge is angled slightly upwards. It meets the leading edge a little bit, pointing upwards in relation to the plane of the wing. And that's called the upwash, right? So the air sort of washes up a little bit, and then you compare that again to the air coming off the or fluid, any fluid coming off the leading edge, the trailing edge, and what you find is that it's angled downwards, right? And this is called the downwash. And it's, if you compare those two, you see, okay, well, one velocity vector is pointing up a little bit, and one is pointing down a little bit, right? And so the wing has caused the fluid to accelerate, as in it's changed its momentum from pointing up a little bit to pointing down a little bit.
Yeah.
And that means that it's imparted a force on the fluid, and which means, from Newton's third law again, that the fluid has imparted an equal and opposite force onto the wing, which is upwards. And again, so this is another kind of partial explanation, because it begs the question, what is causing the wing to deflect the air downwards? And yeah, and you can get really into the weeds of this stuff. I don't actually know what is a good tackling point and how deep we want to get in this, but yeah, effectively, you can say, you can sort of step towards the full explanation. So halfway would be to say, okay, well, as you said, the air, because the air is going to be, well, as we're saying, you can't have a vacuum. And that's actually a little bit of a overly simplistic turn of phrase, because there are many ways for nature to prevent a vacuum from forming. And one way is for the air to perfectly streamline follow the curvature of the wing, right? There are two streamlines, one going over the top, one going over the bottom, and they kind of, they meet up at the trailing edge. And this is, if you say, well, okay, that is what must be happening, because if the streamline going over the top of the wing were to go straight as opposed to following the curvature of the wing, then there would be a vacuum. Bad stuff happens. That's right. Not a good solution. Yeah. And so that, the fact that it's forced to follow the curvature of the wing means that it's deflected downwards and travels faster. And then in these two competing explanations, that produces the lift. But actually, that's really not the only way that it could that nature could prevent a vacuum from forming. One way is for there to be turbulent flow, sort of towards the trailing edge of the wing. So the streamlines sort of kind of separate off the wing, and air from the back of the wing gets sort of sucked in and spun up like a tumble dryer. And that's well, it's a very complicated sort of fluid dynamics, but that's more or less what happens when a wing stalls. So our audience are probably familiar with the car stalling, and some might be familiar with this concept of aerodynamic stalling. So it's basically when the lift produced by a wing undergoes a rapid drop, and the cause of this is the sort of separation of the streamlines from the wing, and you get turbulent flow kind of over the wing as opposed to this nice laminar flow. Yeah, when you get this, it's if you're learning to fly, you get hammered into your brain that this what determines when the wing is stalled is the what's called the angle of attack of the wing. So it's sort of the angle between the plane of the wing and the sort of effective direction of flow of the fluid. And if you increase the angle of attack, so if you sort of tilt the wing further and further backwards, eventually you get to a point where the airflow separates, so it produces this turbulent flow, and the lift force rapidly drops. And when you do that, your bird or plane sort of starts descending very rapidly, and you need to get out of that stall very quickly. So that's our halfway explanation, right? Okay, if you take it for granted that the airflow has to flow nicely over the wing, then wonderful. We can all accept that there's going to be a resulting force going upwards on the wing. The sort of trickier part is explaining under what conditions you really expect for this nice airflow to be going over the wing. But yeah, maybe we take stock of what we've explained so far. This is kind of one potential solution, to the equations of motion of this fluid that doesn't have this, or that doesn't obey our assumptions that the air flows nicely and smoothly over the wings the whole way and meets up at the trailing edge and continues laminally. There are other ways. You could have, for example, you could have laminar flow, but one of the streamlines kind of wraps back around the trailing edge, sort of started heading towards the front of the wing, and then the two streamlines meet and they go off away from the wing. Right. So maybe we can include some diagrams here for the potential solutions that you could have that sort of to first order seem like they are good solutions to the equations, but are in fact not very common to find in practice.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So when I say solutions to the equations, by the way, at the end of the day, all of this is coming from the Navier-Stokes equations, which are the kind of governing equations for the dynamics of any fluid. They really are they are the fundamentals. That if you can go back and solve those, then you'll come up with the right answer. But the issue is that they are incredibly complicated, very, very tricky to deal with. And so there are certain assumptions that we make in order to make our lives easier.
Yeah. Again, caveat number one, this is not a nice, simple, elegant explanation.
Yeah.
This feels like a good time to mention how Einstein got stuck his neck into all this. Because, maybe it goes without saying, but, Newton nor Bernoulli were trying to describe things remaining in the air when they were developing all of this. So Einstein had a crack at this, and his basic idea was the more curve you have in your wing, the more distance there will be, and the more, due to the bend, and that's going to equal more airspeed. So even he kind of fell into that trap a little bit. And so he designed a wing called, or what has now been called the cat's back for the kind of shape of it. It's just kind of long with a little hump in the middle, and then it keeps going. And
okay, yeah.
What's kind of funny though is a pilot, they actually built a plane with this design to see if it would work. And
really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And this is my favorite part of this, is that the pilot reported that the plane, it felt like he was riding a pregnant duck. Because there was just too much turbulence. It kept bouncing up and down and up and down.
Do we have a picture of this wing design?
Yeah. Let's see if I can pull it up.
Maybe we can share it with the audience.
Yeah, we'll definitely have this shared with everybody.
Oh, okay. So we've got so normal wing. And then we've got something that kind of in profile looks a bit like a boomerang.
I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah. Interesting. And so what his hypothesis was that this would cause the sort of greatest difference between the speed of the air going over the top and bottom of the wing, or something like that?
Basically, he kind of bought into this idea of the bigger curve you can get on your wing, while keeping it a wing, keeping it mostly flat, will just increase the distance that the air has to go.
Yeah.
And the farther it has to go, the faster it's going to have to go.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where it falls apart a little bit.
It's super interesting. I really don't have a good intuition for this at all, but obviously, what I'm saying could be totally wrong. It would need to be experimented. But I would have thought, given this design, you might expect there to be more air that is stalled over the back of the wing. Because if you see what the air of the top of the wing has to do, right? Initially it's very easily following the surface, but then it has to accelerate over that hump to go back to the trailing edge. And it seems to me kind of plausible that at least some of the time it fails to do that, and you get the turbulent flow over the back of the wing. So I don't know, but that seems possible. Anyway, so it's certainly not the design that you would want to go for.
No, unless you're going for that pregnant duck flight.
Yeah, that's really what we want for our transatlantic journeys. So let me just maybe bring the kind of lift explanation to its close and try and attempt to go from that halfway explanation that we had to something approximating a full explanation. With the proviso that obviously to properly understand this, you probably need to go and go into the maths. But more or less, so as I said before, there are all of these potential solutions that you might expect to find, right? One is that the sort of most natural looking one, which is that everything flows uniformly and nicely over the wing, and the streamlines that go over the top and bottom meet up again at the trailing edge. And then there are more complicated laminar flow situations where maybe the streams actually meet up somewhere along the top or bottom edge of the wing. So one of the streamlines wraps around the back edge of the wing. And it turns out that if you make an assumption which is very natural in air, which is that the viscosity of the air goes to zero. This is a term in the Navier-Stokes equations you can just set to zero. All of these solutions are possible. So we actually have an infinite number of possible solutions that for how the air for how the air passes over the wing. Effectively, that infinite number of solutions corresponds to where those two streamlines meet up again. So if it's at the trailing edge, that's one solution. If it's elsewhere, those are different ones.
Right.
And the thing that selects out the correct solution in most cases, you basically have to put it in again by hand. And it comes with this name called the Kutta condition, Kutta. So you can have a Google. And basically that just means that the streamlines meet up at the trailing end, which is exactly what the sort of natural thing is you would expect. The reason that happens is basically that the airflow that's very, very close to the wing is not actually inviscid. It isn't zero velocity. It isn't zero viscosity. It does have some viscosity. And when you take into account that viscosity, that viscous layer, it turns out that a lot of these solutions become very unphysical and unreasonable. And basically, the viscous layer would have to be sort of accelerating around the trailing edge of that wing, and that it would have to be undergoing like a lot of some serious forces.
It's
And that's so you sort of neglect those solutions as being unlikely or unable to happen. But yeah, so this is kind of the full explanation for why the air is diverted over the wing. You have to assume effectively this Kutta condition, and when you assume that, you find that the correct solution actually generates lift, because some of these other solutions you don't have any lift associated with them.
Right.
So that's kind of approaching the full solution. But yeah, I mean, I understand that for the audience that might be a little too hand wavy or not.
Just trust us.
Not quite so satisfying. But yeah, it's this. It's this Kutta condition that kind of is the source of it all. This is a very complicated phenomenon, and there are many ways of looking at it, and all of them are kind of accurate.
Yeah, I mean, I'll mention too. I'll link to this in the show notes. There, I was reading an article on Scientific American, and they gave the basic explanation that that's where I got a lot of my information from. But kind of near the end of the article, they're talking about this author, this like an expert in the field, and they wrote. They tried to write a comprehensive book on this, hundreds of pages long, and trying to come up with like a 16-page summary of it. And essentially what they were saying was like, these little things that happen, it kind of ends up just creating a state where it all just works together. Like it's not just going to happen on its own. You need to get your plane moving, you got to get it in the air, and all these things. But
Yeah.
they kind of reinforce themselves. But there's so many different ways you can look at it, and none of them are completely satisfying.
Yeah.
And there are just so many tiny levers in this machine.
Yeah.
And you need all 10 fingers on all you need all 10 fingers on every lever just to get it right. And then and then it works.
Yeah.
And then you're in the air.
Yeah, it's a miracle. And it's like, there's, if we had fully understood how all of this works, before taking to the air, so to speak, before inventing planes, there's no way we would have ever invented planes.
No, yeah.
It's just, it's, this, a lot of this is just, you got to experiment and and do a lot of engineering.
Something that only became apparent to me when I was doing my deep dive into all this is that even something like a propeller, it's really just a tiny wing. It's just it's doing a lot of the same things, just in a different orientation.
Yeah, I mean this phenomenon of lift. I mean, we keep talking about aerofoils and plane wings and things like that, but it's far more broad than that. I mean, for example, the way that a sail on a sailplane works, sail on a sailboat, a yacht or something, that sail generates lift. And I mean, propellers, as you say, like both in the water and on the air, hydrofoils. So these like devices that can bring boats and surfboards and things out of the water, so that you look like you're hovering. Right. It's all the same thing, all the same phenomenon.
Wild stuff.
So should we get on to kind of actually nailing down the question that was asked?
So to reiterate the question, right? Can a bird remain aloft and glide along merely by facing into the wind, that is to say, without flapping its wings, or does it necessarily need to find some air movement with a definite upward component, such as a thermal?
Yeah. So what's your summary to this?
I think it's not gonna work for the birds.
Yeah. Yeah, it's initially I was thinking, oh sure, it would, that's fine, it would work. I was kind of imagining a situation in that the bird could somehow maintain its speed through the air without losing sort of any more altitude than it initially was. And that's, I think, where the kind of fallacy in that way of thinking comes in, because as you increase the wind speed, you also increase the drag on the bird. Yeah. And so its airspeed is actually just going to be determined by its descent through the air. So if you increase the speed of the wind, the airspeed, initially the airspeed of the bird is going to be increased, if it's a headwind, because it's
right, but it's not going to be able to maintain
exactly. Yeah,
that.
Its airspeed will start to slow down again until it became what initially it was. Which is to say, effectively, the speed of the wind doesn't matter at all, because once you're off the ground, it literally, you just don't know, like you don't have any, assuming it's not turbulent, right? Assuming it's traveling in one direction. If you don't look at the ground, you have no idea which way the wind is coming from. You only can tell because you notice that going in one direction, you go incredibly fast over the ground, and one direction you go very, very slowly or backwards over the ground. So that's, I think, my take home from this.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was also just this idea of like, if it's plausible, it would have to be a very ideal situation, and it would have to last forever.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I guess if the
bird, there'll just be a skeleton. And
I can imagine maybe a situation in which, a very totally unphysical situation where if the wind was uniformly accelerating, and in fact, wait, maybe I can. Okay, maybe we're getting too complicated. But if the wind was uniformly accelerating, you could imagine that potentially the increase in the lift kind of outcompetes the increase in drag. Now,
Yeah.
I know that the lift goes proportional to the square of the velocity of the fluid. So, and I think also the drag might. Yeah, okay. So as you increase your wind speed, your airspeed, effectively what's called parasitic drag takes over from. There are basically two, or there's maybe more, but there are sort of two big components of drag that you can think of in flight, and one is called lift-induced drag, or just induced drag, and it's it has to do with the it's always present whenever you have a wing that's producing lift, and then you have this parasitic drag, which is sort of what you might more naturally think of as drag. So the air that's hitting the frame and sort of causing some friction as it moves over the frame and the layers of the air drag against each other. Okay, so and I think it seems like the parasite drag also goes up with the square of the velocity, so you might be losing either way.
And at some point you're just gonna your bird is gonna the feathers are just gonna be ripped off the body.
That's very true. Yeah.
You go fast enough, you get hot enough, you're gonna have you're gonna cook your bird.
Yeah, exactly.
Is it possible to cook your bird by maintaining its
Yes, that's okay. Yeah, that's right. So the parasitic drag is proportional to the square of the airspeed. So as if you these two forces are going to be sort of increasing in step with one another. So yeah, effectively the drag is going to push you backwards, which is going to reduce the lift, and that's it's not going to be able to maintain your height indefinitely, even with an accelerating wing, I don't think.
Feels nice to have a definitive question here on question field for once.
Yeah, and definitive answer. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, it is sort of maybe the first time that's actually happened. So thank you to your dad.
It only took us 11 episodes. Campbell, you had a quote for us.
Yeah,
to kind of wrap this up.
When I was diving into this, I came across a quote by Lord Rayleigh. So this is, actually, I don't know much about him at all, to be honest, which is probably a bit bad. I should have looked this up a little bit more. But he had some article in Nature where he was discussing bird flight, and it was in the 1880s. And the quote goes like this: "I premise that if we know anything about mechanics, it is certain that a bird without working his wings cannot either in still air or in a uniform horizontal wind maintain his level indefinitely." So that means that, and again, the quote continues, "Whenever a bird pursues his course for some time without working his wings, we must conclude either, 1, that the course is not horizontal," so that is that the bird is descending, 2, that the wind is not horizontal, or 3, that the wind is not uniform. And so each of these we can sort of begin to understand, right? 1, the course is not horizontal, so as I said before, the bird is sort of angled downwards, it's descending through the air. 2, the wind is not horizontal, and so if there's some upward component of the wind, then even though the bird can be descending through the wind, it can actually still be ascending in relation to the ground. So this is something that, glider pilots use all the time to gain altitude. The third possibility is that the wind is not uniform. And that is a whole new kettle of fish that we might need to get into in a different episode. Yeah. So yeah, it's
I think we will hit that one day, but not today. We of course need you to keep coming back for more.
Yeah.
Here on Question Field. I just looked it up real quick. Lord Rayleigh won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1904.
Oh, there you go. For what? What exactly?
For his investigations of the densities of the most important gases and for his discovery of argon in connection with those studies.
There you go. Fascinating. Well, good on Lord Rayleigh and understanding how birds glide.
Yeah, in his spare time.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me take a break from winning this Nobel Prize and let me explain birds to you all.
Amazing.
But yeah, no, that wraps it up. We will, maybe we'll get into that last bit of fish kettling another episode. But that has been all for this episode of Question Field, the place where you ask the questions and we field them. As always, please leave a review. We have some nice ones. Thank you to those that have left some reviews.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I'm just going to call some people out. I know you have some people listen and haven't left a review. And it's like I don't want to have to text you or call you. Like, that's going to be awkward. So just leave a review. But really, it really helps. Thank you, everybody that has been sharing our stuff on the gram. Sorry to all the bike enthusiasts we offended on TikTok.
To be honest, I'm at a complete loss what some of those comments actually meant, which is maybe not a good sign.
Yeah. Man, who knows? Who knows? Even more complicated than physics is dissecting the comment section of a TikTok video. But thank you, everybody. This has been Question Field, and we will catch you next time.
I hear it in my head every time you you sign off.
You've been listening to Question Field. Question Field is a Gain Media production and is produced by its hosts Campbell McLaughlin and Brian Buchanan. For more information, please check us out on Instagram at QuestionFieldPod, on Twitter at QuestFieldPod, and on TikTok at QuestionField. If you have a question you'd like to submit, or would simply like to leave a message, please send us an email at questionfieldpod@gmail.com. Recently, the James Webb Telescope discovered 5 new stars located in the review section of your favorite podcast app. Thank you for listening.